Hello and welcome. My name is Jim Chang. I'm the founder and CEO of MyLegalEinstein. Today I'll be giving a product demonstration of our new AI-powered legal contract review application. Thank you very much to Christoph for the invitation to actually present here today at the Legal Innovation Conference for March 2021. So just a quick word about my background. I'm actually not from the legal background. I'm actually from the AI side. Previous to starting MyLegalEinstein, I actually led the AI engineering efforts for both Icertis as well as for Aptus, both big players in the CLM space. So let's talk a little bit about why someone would actually use MyLegalEinstein. The primary use case for using MyLegalEinstein is in terms of reviewing third-party contracts. So AI, as well as legal AI, is really able to understand a lot of words in terms of the legal context and be able to understand legal contracts themselves. And I'm talking a little bit about how that actually works. But the key aspects and the key reasons why someone would use MyLegalEinstein is to be able to isolate the risk as well as understand the compliance issues associated with third-party contracts. Now, third-party contracts are quite different than contracts that you actually originate from your own CLM systems or your own paper. Because typically, if you actually are able to originate the paper, you do have much less risk involved. But a lot of times, you're actually reviewing third-party contracts because you actually have to accept the other vendor's paper or other partner's paper. So when you're actually reviewing the third-party contracts, you're using MyLegalEinstein to actually develop the red line changes to those contracts. And that's actually kind of a critical piece because we are actually able to use AI to compare different types of contracts as well as playbooks, as well as contracts on your own paper, and we'll go into that as well. And then the third aspect is that we're actually able to provide a complete platform to collaborate, negotiate, as well as execute that contract. So collaboration actually often means that you actually work with internal finance teams, outside counsel, in-counsel, or other players in the space. Business owners, for example, and negotiate actually means working with the counterparty. And I'll go into what that means. So the primary users for this MyLegalEinstein system is anyone who actually reviews contracts. And this is actually before the execution phase of that contract. Right now, MyLegalEinstein only supports English contracts, but we do have plans to actually do further internationalization to support German, as well as other languages as well. So before we actually get into the product demonstration, I actually want to talk a little bit about the security aspects, because MyLegalEinstein, we take security very, very seriously. Legal contracts are very, very sensitive pieces of information. So from the ground up, MyLegalEinstein is actually implemented on the Google Cloud infrastructure, which is actually very thorough in terms of the security as well as the scalability application of the actual underlying infrastructure. It supports both subscription models as well as a completely hosted instance. A hosted instance actually allows you to actually separate all of the data associated with an organization into your own specific area or so. It's fully GDPR compliant, so we actually make it a policy not to serve you ads or not do no data sharing associated with user information or anything along those lines. Data privacy as well as user privacy is absolutely critical, especially in the legal contract space. In addition to all these security measures, we also have a full applications set that actually allows you to do data encryption between different points within a system, extensive user authentication, as well as specifically document logging. Because one of the things that's actually critical is that in our system of MyLegalEinstein, every interaction that a user actually has with a document is actually logged and is actually able to be actually seen. So let's get into the demonstration at this point. Okay, as we're continuing, one of the things that people always have a misconception about is in terms of legal AI and how hard it is. And the reality is that one of the missions of MyLegalEinstein is to make legal AI as accessible to anyone as possible. So instead of actually having to go through a long implementation cycles, training data, and everything else associated with it, instead of that, with MyLegalEinstein, you can actually simply register onto the site. It actually sends you an authentication email to authenticate your email. And then you can log in with that specific email and automatically start analyzing contracts. And it's actually quite immediate. You actually can be up and running in under 5 minutes or so. So you can actually go through the registration process here. This is actually a very simple way to actually register through a free 30-day trial. And then after that, you can actually then go log into the system. So I'm going to log in right now as one of our test users. Okay, so now we actually logged into the MyLegalEinstein system. And what you actually see is two side-by-side panels. And right now, I'm actually going to kick off the processing of one contract just as a demonstration contract. And after that actually gets kicked off, I'm going to, let's see, pick one of the contracts here. And as that's processing, it typically takes about 3 to 4 minutes to process a contract that's about 30 to 40 pages or so. And it depends on how long the actual contract is, but it's typically comes back in a pretty reasonable amount of time. And before that actually happens, and as it's actually going into processing, I'll explain to you what that processing actually is. But when we actually look at the MyLegalEinstein system, what you see is two side-by-side panels. So one of the inspirations behind how MyLegalEinstein is designed is that the real estate on your screen is actually optimized for the review of legal text. And that's obviously the case when you're actually looking at what to do to modify and review contracts. So the other aspect is you actually have, by default, you have two panels side by side. But depending on your screen size, you can actually go and increase the number of documents that you could actually compare on a side-by-side basis. So you can actually have 3, you have 4, you have up to 6 in one specific browser environment. Realistically speaking, because of the screen size, you might, on this screen size, you can actually probably review up to 4 documents side by side. But it's really completely up to you. You can actually have something with high screen resolution and be able to compare 6 contracts side by side. Now, the reason why that's designed that way is so that you can actually have each panel contain different types of contract documents. So as an example, you can actually be reviewing a contract on the left side, but at the same time, find similar contracts, similar playbooks that actually might apply to the space, clause libraries, as well as other contracts that you might want to compare as a reference point. Because the reality is that from a legal standpoint, most people are not originating contract language from scratch. They're actually usually referring to other documents and then being able to craft it and edit it in a way that fits the specific document itself. So at this point, I'm going to, I think it's 80% completed at this point. I'm going to show you what it actually does. Now, as it actually completes, one of the first things it actually does is it actually goes and extracts the information, extracts the text from the document itself. So currently we support docx documents as well as PDF documents. So for PDF documents, you actually are going through a OCR process to actually extract the text itself before it actually goes and determines what text is actually in the document itself. Now for each paragraph block, you can actually see it's actually just returned. Each paragraph block, part of the AI aspect is to be able to go map each and every one of the paragraphs to some type of category on the left side, as you can actually see. It says none, introduction, heading, preamble, etc. And for each paragraph, it actually maps it to a specific legal topic. So here is the set of legal topics that is currently supported across all contracts. So you have typically introductions, preambles, and this list of legal topics is chosen based on kind of the most commonly searched for terms across all contracts. So you see typically people are looking at termination, they're looking at dispute resolution, they're looking at liability and indemnification. And the key thing to recognize is that all of the labels are actually generated completely automatically for you. Now, the thing about legal AI is that it's very, very sophisticated in terms of how it's actually implemented. So what it's effectively doing is actually looking at each paragraph. And because of the way that the human language and text actually is represented, you can actually have multiple legal topics represented in each paragraph. And that's actually very, very normal. So what we're effectively doing is taking each paragraph and just assigning a probability of whether it actually represents a specific legal topic or not. And based on what is the most likely legal topic, it will actually indicate that on the left side. Now, the user always has the option. I'm going to save this document for now. We'll just kind of say it's test doc 1. We'll save this for now, and we'll go and be able to look at other things. But you can actually go and look at the clause labels and determine which ones, for example, this is preamble, this is preamble, this is preamble, these actually all look quite reasonable. And there may be some sections where you basically say this particular paragraph may actually be, in your judgment, a little bit different than what the legal AI actually is interpreting it as. So you can actually go click on this and actually determine it could be intellectual property, lawyer property, representation of warranties. And this is actually a prioritized list of, well, how AI interprets that contract in terms of the different legal topics. So usually, if it's not the top category, it might be the second choice, it might be the third choice. And it's actually completely up to you. You can actually kind of choose to change this, for example, as the reputations and warranties, and actually is represented in the system. Now, usually with legal AI, you're actually able to get mostly close to correct, because the interesting thing about the legal space is that it's always based on legal interpretation. Now, legal AI is probably close to human error rates in terms of being able to determine how accurate a label actually is. So as an example, if you actually showed one paragraph to 10 attorneys or so, 9 attorneys may actually agree that it's one specific category. The 10th one might be saying it's a different type of category. And that's actually considered kind of a human error aspects. So the legal AI in the system is actually close to that level of accuracy. Okay, so you can actually see maybe it's 10% or maybe 15% error. And if there's any substantial differences, you can actually adjust the labels as you chose to. However, not only that, because the labels are actually pretty close to accurate, usually we actually get the right answer in the first indicator. Sometimes, if it's not the first one, it actually might be the second choice or it might be the third choice. Now, one of the great things about being able to understand the specific contract is you can then go look at each of the topics. And the way to interpret this topic list is that on the top, you actually have 182 paragraphs that have actually been analyzed. And 1 is instructions, 6 is preambles, 2 is definitions. So as an example, you can actually always look at, for example, what is the governing law of this hosted contract? You can actually see it's the state of Maryland, which it's a US-based contract. Or you can actually look at, for example, the termination clauses associated with this contract. And you can actually see these are actually the termination clauses, which are very easy ways to actually navigate the contract. And it could be a very long contract, 80 to 100 pages. And one of the first things you actually might look for is perhaps you might see that there is no topic labeled for taxes. And it's really up to the attorney's judgment about whether that's actually appropriate for this type of contract or not. Now, in order to double check it, what we also allow you to do is increase or decrease the sensitivity associated with how we actually filter that specific topic. So as an example, we can actually pick, for example, termination. Termination, you can actually see the termination conditions. There's 2 paragraphs here that's actually related to termination. You can also actually increase the sensitivity associated with this filter. So if it's actually close to termination, it will actually be indicated in this list. The reason why you bring this up is that when you're actually reviewing contracts, and they're usually very, very long contracts, it's quite often the case that a person would actually review a contract and miss certain things. And that's actually effectively the way that the human language works. There are certain sections, for example, in the specific contract that actually might refer to termination, but it's not labeled as maybe one of the headings associated with a termination, or it's not obvious, or it could be a crossover between different topics. So, for example, this one is actually related to dispute resolution, but it's also related to termination, which is also quite reasonable. Another aspect is, for example, if you actually go look at things like payments. So as you can imagine, for every contract, there usually is a very large financial component associated with the contract. And that financial language is actually in sometimes payment sections. For example, this one picks up paragraph 51, paragraph 54, paragraph 64, and 67 as basically the primary payment language, and maybe 71 and 74 as well. But when you actually increase the sensitivity associated with the payments, you also see there's a lot of different paragraphs here that says, for example, shall pay all temporary utility charges, for example, here in section 15, section 26 or paragraph 26, etc. All throughout the document, you can see it all spread out across the entire document itself. And that is actually a critical piece when you're actually trying to do a deep dive on terms of a specific topic. So one of the things we're actually able to do is being able to deep dive on specific topics. So one of the great use cases associated with how MyLegalEinstein is used is when you start the collaboration process on this specific document, it automatically, you can actually set up the alerts here. And we actually had some examples of these, how these alerts will work, is that you can actually set up an alert that automatically sends those specific topics. For example, it says sends the payments and taxes to a specific recipient, for example, Brenda Adams. And once you actually start the collaboration process for this contract, it automatically interprets that specific directive and sends that specific email to Brenda. So let me give you an example of this. This is actually what the system generated document would actually look like. This is actually generated by John at MyLegalEinstein, and then it tells you what the specific clause topics are. It tells you what the alert name is. And then the document extract indicates that these are the paragraphs associated with that new contract that's being reviewed, and all the financial terms associated with it. And this is actually intended to be automatically alerting a CFO or the finance team associated with the contract, even as soon as the actual contract is actually starting to be reviewed. So that's actually one of the more important aspects of how we structure MyLegalEinstein to be able to be kind of a very group-oriented tool. Now, we actually go back. Now, we actually talked about basically the ability to find if some topic is missing in a contract. We might want to do a deep dive or just to do a double check on specific things on a specific contract. And then what we're going back to is basically the ability to compare different contracts. So we mentioned that there's actually ways to actually increase the documents on here. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm looking at this contract now. Let's go take a look at all of the sections of the contract. And I'm going to open, for example, a playbook. A playbook is a great example of, for example, this is an ABC corporate playbook. Maybe it's for automotive procurement contracts. It might not be directly related to this, but you kind of get a sense of what it is. It basically says, okay, for termination, the termination allows for certain types of rules associated with what you actually look for in the contract. And it actually also may include different types of standard clause language. So this entire section could actually be termination related. So we can actually just kind of see that. So this is all termination sections associated with the playbook, and there might be an indemnification section on the other side as well. And we can also basically include other contracts as well. So let's go open another contract here. Let's go pick, for example, these are kind of standard. I think this is actually the same contract. So let me just pick another contract that might be able to compare with this. Here's some other contract as well, or maybe you can actually find something else that basically says I am either opening an archive document. Here's an archive document here. Well, it's actually quite similar to the other one. So another aspect is basically you can actually have this document on the left, which you're actually reviewing, compared against the playbook, compared against the clause library set, compared against your own paper. So you can actually understand side by side what the differences are. And each one of these panels allows you to actually go navigate the topics. So here you can actually go look at, for example, indemnification. Here you can actually look at other things like also indemnification or maybe governing law or so. And you can actually see this side by side because each panel can actually operate independently. Now, the reason why we actually put it this way is that when we actually looked at how in-house counsel or people who are actually doing the legal review process actually reviews contracts, what you see is that a lot of times they actually might have multiple Microsoft Word instances up with each type of document. So, for example, you can have an MSA or an amendment, etc. And you're effectively comparing different contracts, and you're typically doing lots of text searches between them. So we are able to do that, but we can also do it in a much more elegant way, which is basically this concept of legal topic syncs. So we can actually indicate, for example, we can actually just click these on, and effectively what it does is that for that specific panel, it goes and listens for different topics. So when you change a topic on the left side, what you see is, for example, you can actually go and click on indemnification. And here you have all of the screen representing indemnification language. So it shows what this contract is on the left side, what the language is for the indemnification. You see what the playbook says. You see what other contracts that you might be working on also says about indemnification, and you can see all of this language side by side. You can also adjust the sensitivity associated with each one. So you actually might be more inclusive in terms of definitions. It's all completely up to you. But the great thing about this is that it reduces a lot of the monotonous work associated with the legal review process, because you're able to see like legal language together, and you're actually able to see it in different ways. So you can actually, for example, also termination is also a great example. So termination, you can actually just go look at termination language across these things, and you can see this might be the termination language associated with this contract. This is the playbook. This is different types of termination language in each of the different contracts. So one of the more obvious things to do is basically just go look at the termination. And for example, here, you might have your standard termination language from your own playbook, and you might want to go and replace this language in the contract itself. So I'm just going to just kind of copy it there, and that's initial template. And usually you still need to make some further edits here. For example, we'll just do some quick edits like for company A or other company or etc. And you modify the specific section so that it applies to the specific contract. Then what you're actually able to do is then go indicate a replacing of that specific clause in that contract itself. So the reason why I actually brought this up is you can actually see this comparison of legal language side by side. So it makes the attorney's life a lot easier to be able to find and isolate which language makes the most sense to actually redline this contract. And that's actually a very, very critical point. Now that everybody here understands that piece, what I'm going to talk a little bit about is I'm going to reduce basically this size here, the collaboration as well as the negotiation process. Now, one of the challenges associated with how companies are actually collaborating and negotiating is that when we're talking about a specific document, a lot of times, a lot of the negotiation actually happens over emails as well as redlined Word documents, and they get sent from one person to another. And a lot of times it actually causes a lot of confusion in terms of who suggested which type of red line, who might have approved that red line or not, and who actually has the next action item associated with that, with the negotiation of that specific contract. So in this case, we could actually say that we, for example, are getting this text document, we're actually negotiating this contract, and what we'd like to do is we'd like to start the collaboration and negotiation process for this contract. Now, different than how you'd actually do it with Microsoft Word is in terms of passing the document back and forth. You can do all of the negotiation and collaboration on the specific platform itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the collaboration process. We're going to start the negotiation process. We're going to add collaborators and the negotiators, and then do the entire change associated with this contract online. So in order to do that, we're going to do it with a different browser environment. So let's go start this collaboration process, and I'll explain to you what that actually means, and then start the negotiation process. And for collaborator, let's add Sally at MyLegalEinstein, which is a test account under MyLegalEinstein as a collaborator. And I'm going to add, as a negotiator, Nancy at MyLegalEinstein.com. Okay. So once you actually do that, what you see on the right side is a number of bubbles. So these bubbles each represent different types of things. So the circular bubbles actually represents the collaboration side. The square bubbles represents the negotiation side. Now, these circular bubbles actually is intended for internal communications. So for example, the collaboration, as opposed to negotiation, in the collaboration, you might have collaborations between the owner of this contract and, for example, the finance team to actually approve financial terms or payment terms. You might have collaboration with an outside counsel or other people on the inside counsel side. You might have some collaboration with the operations team or maybe some of the business leaders. All of these types of communications can actually do by, for example, let's go back to, for example, the beginning section and say we want to say how, here's an internal comment. Okay, so we can add a comment, and this is actually represented inside the company. And you can actually also do a specific change. So for example, you can actually, let's say we want to make a change to this particular sentence, and we'll basically just copy that sentence down below and maybe delete a very large section of it, for example. We can actually say, let's go replace this, and then that would actually indicate the red line. Now, another way, we actually talk about basically starting a collaboration process as well as the negotiation process. On this specific machine, what I actually did was I actually included a different browser, which actually is logged on as Sally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that document that we just started collaboration called test doc. And I'm going to go open that here. And this will actually open that specific document. And I can see the red lines that John actually made. So in this type of scenario, John actually owns the document, but Sally is actually able to view it. And as a collaborator, Sally actually is able to actually suggest certain types of changes. Now, let's say we say, okay, we'll just say Sally's making a comment, go, hi, John, or something of that sort. And then we want to have Sally, for example, look at this and basically suggest a specific document edit. Maybe the document edit is we delete some section of text or so. Okay, and we basically say that is the replacement. Now, Sally is actually suggesting this, but if you actually look at this, the owner as well as the negotiator is pending status. And what that means is that this is suggested, but it's not finalized. And John, who's the document owner, actually then can see and review that specific comment under the collaboration document edits and be able to see that Sally here has actually suggested the specific change that is indicated on the other side. Now, notice that at no point do we actually need to refresh this view. It's actually instantaneous updates because everything's actually done on the same platform. So there's no need to refresh the view. Everything's completely instantaneous. So I can actually approve this change from Sally. And one of the things that actually happens when you actually do that is that Sally proposed the change, I approve the change, and then that change then goes into the negotiation phase. So on a separate browser, I can actually log on as the counterparty, Nancy, and be able to open this document called test doc, and then see the changes that are presented for my review. So the ones that actually is indicated in blue are things that haven't been approved by Nancy. And I can then go and look at the document edits and be able to go approve each one of the things that is or reject the ones that are actually proposed by the other side. For now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to approve each one. So the reason why I actually indicate it this way is that at no point do you actually need to send documents back and forth. Not only that, all of the changes actually happens and is presented back to Nancy instantaneously. So as opposed to kind of a red line process where you send a document through email, someone actually receives the email, is in charge of that email, and then has to go through the manual process of extracting different pieces of text to send it to different people to actually get their comments on, and then being able to compile that red line, all the red lines for that organization. You can do this completely instantaneously. Everything on this contract. So and these types of compilation of red line comments can sometimes take a couple of weeks to compile. But before that actually happens, you can actually just have it done completely online so that Nancy can actually see the changes that are presented by John the ones that John approves, as soon as those changes are actually made. So every single one of these changes are then actually recorded as well. So if you can actually look, there's a number of changes that actually have been made. There's 3 suggested document edits associated with this contract. You can actually see all of the changes here as well. And you can actually see all of across the entire document, all of the changes that actually have occurred to the specific document. And you actually also have a specific complete document log associated with what has happened to this contract. So as an example, you can actually look at this. And what you see is that John initially opened up the contract, he created the contract, added some document edits, changed the collaboration and negotiation settings, added the negotiators and collaborators associated with this, and then added a comment. And then Sally here also opened the document and then added another comment and added a document edit. And John actually approved the document edit, and Nancy then opens the document and then approves each of the different document edits. So the reason why I brought this up is that when you're actually talking about security, every single interaction that actually happens with this document is then logged. So you can actually then take this document and actually either extract the changes to actually send it to a CLM system. For example, you actually have a number of options here. Export to Excel, which contains a whole range of I'll show you what the Excel spreadsheet actually looks like. It gives you all of the clause labels, so you can actually do any downstream processing associated with the contract itself. It can actually go look at the different changes that actually have been approved on both sides, as well as the entire history associated with the contract. And that's all contained in the Excel spreadsheet. Or we can also have other actions like, for example, sending to the CLM system. Because we also recognize that there's a number of application systems that actually then accept the change and then might go through a document signing process or something along those lines. And then we could also have this contract actually completely executed. So for example, this is actually the Excel spreadsheet. You have each of the tabs that actually has the clause labels. So sometimes you might want to actually extract the raw text and be able to send it down to some downstream process, for example. You're going to actually have a complete order, you're going to get the complete collaboration comments, document edits, risk labels, comments, etc. So all of that is actually represented here, and there's many different ways to actually feed into downstream systems to do that. In addition, you actually could also potentially take this contract and completely execute it. And then we're going to basically just assume that that's going to be the case. We actually execute the contract, digitally sign the contract, and you can actually then move it to the archive phase. And you can actually potentially say that this may be executed on March 1st, 2021, resulted in an executed contract, and that might add some additional information associated with this. It's completely, we'll just kind of say it's no, etc. There's actually additional metadata to it. And you can actually move it to the archive side, and then you can actually then open it as an archive document. And at this point, you are no longer able to make any changes to it. You can actually see the comments that have actually been made, but it's only available as a read-only. And then when, for example, you might have a executed PDF associated with this contract, you can actually go and upload the executed contract so that the parties can actually have a final copy of what that finalized contract would actually look like. So you can actually put a specific contract and then be able to pick something as an executed PDF and then execute this contract. So it's a full life cycle associated with collaborating, negotiating the contract, and then finalizing the executed contract onto MyLegalEinstein. So anyway, I hope this demonstration kind of gives you the kind of an understanding of what this application is intended to do. It really kind of it's targeted specifically to the attorney who is reviewing the contract, looking and comparing third-party contract paper to their existing contracts, existing paper, playbooks, etc., so they can determine what types of changes are appropriate for this contract. And then also being able to include all the other people, all the other collaborators, all the other negotiators on this contract, so everyone can do this at the same time. The reason why we actually do kind of talk a little about the collaboration and negotiation process is that allows you to speed the execution of contracts substantially, because you don't have the cycles where everyone is blocked based on the next person's step. So everything actually can happen in parallel. Changes that are suggested from collaborators can actually be approved by John, and those things can actually then be automatically presented for the negotiator for consideration. So there's no one blocking this specific process. So you still get to execute a contract probably in half the time of what you would happen if you didn't use a system like this. So anyway, I presented a lot of material, and I apologize if I'm talking a little too quickly, but I'm going to show you what my email is, jim@MyLegalEinstein.com. And you can actually feel free to go and register on the site and then try out the system at no cost and just get a sense of how well the legal AI actually understands the contracts you have. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to the Swiss Legal Tech organization for inviting us to kind of talk about what this product actually does. It's one of those things. From our standpoint, it's quite gratifying to actually understand and be able to apply the whole concept of artificial intelligence, which is a huge buzzword for a lot of the industry, in terms of addressing a lot of the mundane work associated with legal contract review, so that we can actually fully automate it for attorneys to kind of help save from some of the mundane work and actually kind of focus people on addressing kind of more of the strategic efforts. So anyway, I appreciate your time. Feel free to actually reach out to me if you have any further questions. And again, thank you very much for Swiss Legal Tech. Thank you.